Hello, we're back. I'm very late. I'm very late, and I am also very, very tired because I've begun a new habit of attending BJJ twice on Thursdays and Tuesdays at 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. So I've put myself in the grapple blender twice today. I am very sore. Worked a lot of deep half guard and some lasso guard stuff. Kind of got my ass kicked by my buddy Bruno. Very demoralizing because he was gone for a month and then came back and ripped 3 subs on me in 5 minutes. So that's a downer. But anyway, we're here. I might read a little less than I originally expected today. I meant to do 14 and 15. I might just do 14 because I'm sleepy. And then, I don't know, maybe we'll be able to do 15 like Thursday or Friday. We'll see. No promises, though, because Thursday I will also be going at 6 and then 5 to grapple. God, am I ever... Just like, at least one of you out there has to also be into this sport. It feels like you just suck forever. Like, I know, I objectively, I know I'm better than I used to be, but goddamn, nothing makes me feel dumber than grappling. Anyway, alright, we'll get started in like a minute. All right, a Canticle for Leibowitz, chapter 14. The vaulted basement had been dug during the centuries of nomadic infiltration from the north, when the Bering horde had overrun most of the plains and desert, looting and vandalizing all villages that lay in their path. The memorabilia, the Abbey's small patrimony of knowledge out of the past, had been walled up in an underground vault to protect the priceless writings from both nomads and soi-disant crusaders of the schismatic orders founded to fight the hordes, but turned to random pillaging and sectarian strife. Neither the nomads nor the military order of San Pancrats would have valued the Abbey's books, but the nomads would have destroyed them for the joy of destruction, and the military knights friars would have burned many of them as heretical, according to the theology of Vissarion, their anti-pope. Now, a dark age seemed to be passing. For 12 centuries, a small flame of knowledge had been kept smoldering in the monasteries, only now were their minds ready to be kindled. Long ago, during the last age of reason, certain proud thinkers had claimed that valid knowledge was indestructible, that ideas were deathless, and truth immortal. But that was true only in the subtlest sense, the abbot thought, and not superficially true at all. There was objective meaning in the world, to be sure, the non-moral logos or design of the Creator, but such meanings were God's and not man's until they found an imperfect incarnation, a dark reflection within the mind and speech and culture of a given human society, which might ascribe values to the meanings so that they became valid in a human sense within the culture. For man was a culture-bearer as well as a soul-bearer, but his cultures were not immortal, and they could die with a race or an age, and then human reflections of meaning and human portrayals of truth receded, and truth and meaning resided, unseen, only in the objective logos of nature, and the ineffable logos of God. Truth could be crucified, but soon, perhaps, a resurrection. The memorabilia was full of ancient words, ancient formula, ancient reflections of meaning detached from minds that had died long ago when a different sort of society had passed into oblivion. There was little of it that could still be understood. Certain papers seemed as meaningless as a breviary would seem to a shaman of the nomad tribes. Others retained a certain ornamental beauty or an orderliness that hinted of meaning, as a rosary might suggest a necklace to a nomad. The earliest brothers of the Leibowitzian order had tried to press a sort of Veronica's veil to the face of a crucified civilization. It had come away marked with an image of the face of ancient grandeur, but the image was faintly printed, incomplete, and hard to understand. The monks had preserved the image, and now it still survived for the world to inspect and try to interpret if the world wanted to do so. The memorabilia could not, of itself, generate a revival of ancient science or high civilization, however, for cultures were begotten by the tribes of man, not by musty tomes. But the books could help, Don Paulo hoped. The books could point out directions and offer hints to a newly evolving science. It had happened once before, so the venerable Baudulus had asserted in his De Vestigiis Antiquarium Civitatem. And this time, thought Don Paulo, we'll keep them reminded of who kept the spark burning while the world slept. He paused to look back. For a moment, he had imagined that he had heard a frightened bleat from the poet's goat. The clamor from the basement soon blanketed his hearing as he descended the underground stairs toward the source of the turmoil. Someone was hammering steel pins into stone. Sweat mingled with the odor of old books. A feverish bustle of unscholarly activity filled the library. Novices hurried past with tools. Novices stood in groups and studied floor plans. Novices shifted desks and tables and heaved a makeshift machinery, rocking it into place. Confusion by lamplight. Brother Armbruster, the librarian and rector of the memorabilia, stood watching it from a remote alcove in the shelves, his arms tightly folded and his face grim. Don Paulo avoided his accusing gaze. Brother Cornhor approached his ruler with a lingering grin of enthusiasm. "Well, Father Abbot, we'll soon have a light such as no man alive has ever seen." "That is not without a certain vanity, brother," Paulo replied. "Vanity, Domne, to put to good use what we've learned?" "I had in mind our haste to put it to use in time to impress a certain visiting scholar. But never mind, let's see this engineer's wizardry." They walked toward the makeshift machine. It reminded the abbot of nothing useful, unless one considered engines for torturing prisoners useful. An axle, serving as the shaft, was connected by pulleys and belts to a waist-high turnstile. 4 wagon wheels were mounted on the axle, a few inches apart. Their thick iron tires were scored with grooves, and the grooves supported countless birds' nests of copper wire drawn from coinage at the local smithy in San Leibowitz. The wheels were apparently free to spin in mid-air, Don Paulo noticed, for their tires touched no surface. However, stationary blocks of iron faced the tires, like brakes, without quite touching them. The blocks, too, had been wound with innumerable turns of wire, Field's coils, as Cornhor called them. Don Paulo solemnly shook his head. "It'll be the greatest physical improvement at the Abbey since we got the printing press 100 years ago," Cornhor ventured proudly. "Will it work?" Don Paulo wondered. "I'll stake a month's extra chores on it, my lord." "You're staking more than that," thought the priest, but suppressed the utterance. "Where does the light come out?" he asked, peering at the odd contraption again. The monk laughed. "Oh, we have a special lamp for that. What you see here is only the dynamo. It produces the electrical essence which the lamp will burn." Ruefully, Don Paulo contemplated the amount of space the dynamo was occupying. "This essence," he murmured, "can't it be extracted from mutton fat, perhaps?" No, the electrical essence is, well, do you want me to explain?" "Better not. Natural science is not my bent. I'll leave it to you younger heads." He stepped back quickly to avoid being brained by a timber carried past by a pair of hurrying carpenters. "Tell me," he said, "if by studying writings from the Leibowitzian age you can learn how to construct this thing, why do you suppose none of our predecessors saw fit to construct it?" The monk was silent for a moment. "It's not easy to explain," he said at last. "Actually, in the writings that survive, there's no direct information about the construction of a dynamo. Rather, you might say that the information is implicit in a whole collection of fragmentary writings, partially implicit, and it has to be got out by deduction. But to get it, you also need some theories to work from, theoretical information our predecessors didn't have." "But we do?" "Well, yes, now that there have been a few men like—" His tone became deeply respectful, and he paused before pronouncing the name. "Like Thontario." "Was that a complete sentence?" the abbot asked, rather sourly. "Well, until recently, few philosophers have concerned themselves with new theories in physics. Actually, it was the work of Thontario," the respectful tone again, Don Paulo noted, "that gave us the necessary working axioms. His work of the mobility of electrical essences, for example, and his conservation theorem." "Oh, he should be pleased, then, to see his work applied. But where is the lamp itself, may I ask? I hope it's no larger than the dynamo." "This is it, Domne," said the monk, picking up a small object from the table. It seemed to be only a bracket for holding a pair of black rods and a thumbscrew for adjusting their spacing. "These are carbons," Kornhor explained. "The ancients would have called it an arc lamp. There was another kind, but we don't have the materials to make it." "Amazing. Where does the light come from?" "Here." The monk pointed to the gap between the carbons. "Well, it must be a very tiny flame," said the abbot. "Oh, but bright. Brighter, I expect, than 100 candles." "No." "You find that impressive?" "I find it preposterous." Noticing Brother Kornhor's sudden hurt expression, the abbot hastily added, "To think how we've been limping along on beeswax and mutton fat." "I have been wondering," the monk shyly confided, "if the ancients used them on their altars instead of candles." "No," said the abbot. "Definitely no. I can tell you that. Please dismiss that idea as quickly as possible, and don't even think of it again." Yes, Father Abbot." "Now, where are you going to hang that thing?" "Well," Brother Kornhor paused to stare speculatively around the gloomy basement. "I hadn't given it any thought. I suppose it should go over the desk where Thontario—" Why does he pause like that whenever he says it? Don Paulo wondered irritably. "Will be working." "Yes, well, we'd better ask Brother Armbruster about that," the abbot decided, and then, noticing the monk's sudden discomfort, "What's the matter? Have you and Brother Armbruster been—" Kornhor's face twisted apologetically. "Really, Father Abbot, I haven't lost my temper with him even once. Oh, we've had words, but—" he shrugged. "He doesn't want anything moved. He keeps mumbling about witchcraft and the like. It's not easy to reason with him. His eyes are half blind now from reading by dim light, and yet he says it's devil's work we're up to. I don't know what to say." Don Paulo frowned slightly as they crossed the room toward the alcove where Brother Armbruster still stood glowering upon the proceedings. "Well, you've got your way now," the librarian said to Kornhor as they approached. "When'll you be putting in a mechanical librarian, brother?" "We find hints, brother, that once there were such things," the inventor growled. "In descriptions of the Machina Analytica, you'll find references to—" Enough! The abbot interposed. Then, to the librarian, "Thontario will need a place to work. What do you suggest?" Armbruster jerked one thumb toward the natural science alcove. Let him read at the lectern in there like anyone else. What about setting up a study for him here on the open floor, Father Abbot? Cornhor suggested in hasty counter-proposal. Besides a desk, he'll need an abacus, a wall slate, and a drawing board. We could partition it off with temporary screens. I thought he was going to need our Leibowitzian references and earliest writings, the librarian said suspiciously. He will. And then he'll have to walk back and forth a lot if you put him in the middle. The rare volumes are chained, and the chains won't reach that far. That's no problem, said the inventor. Take off the chains. They look silly anyway. The schismatic cults have all died out or become regional. Nobody's heard of the Pancratian military order in 100 years. Armbruster reddened angrily. Oh, no, you don't, he snapped. The chains stay on. But why? It's not the book burners now, it's the villagers we have to worry about. The chains stay on. Cornhor turned to the abbot and spread his hands. See, my lord. He's right, said Don Paulo. There's too much agitation in the village. The town council expropriated our school, don't forget. Now they've got a village library, and they want us to fill its shelves, preferably with rare volumes, of course. Not only that, we had trouble with thieves last year. Yes, Brother Armbruster's right. The rare volumes must stay chained. All right, Cornhor sighed. So he'll have to work in the alcove. And now, where do we hang your wondrous lamp? The monks glanced toward the cubicle. It was one of 14 identical stalls, sectioned according to subject matter, which faced the central floor. Each alcove had its archway, and from an iron hook embedded in the keystone of each arch hung a heavy crucifix. Well, if he's going to work in the alcove, said Cornhor, we'll just have to take the crucifix down and hang it there temporarily. There's no other— Heathen! Hissed the librarian. Pagan! Desecrator! Armbruster raised trembling hands heavenward. God help me, lest I tear him apart with these hands! Where will he stop? Take him away! Away! He turned his back on them, his hands still trembling aloft. Don Paulo himself had winced slightly at the inventor's suggestion, but now he frowned sharply at the back of Brother Armbruster's habit. He had never expected him to feign a meekness that was alien to Armbruster's nature, but the aged monk's querulous disposition had grown definitely worse. Brother Armbruster, turn around, please. The librarian turned. Now, drop your hands and speak more calmly when you— But, Father Abbot, you heard what he— Brother Armbruster, you will please get the stepladder and remove the crucifix. The color left the librarian's face. He stared, speechless, at Don Paulo. This is not a church, said the abbot. The placement of images is optional. For the present, you will please take down the crucifix. It is the only suitable place for the lamp, it seems. Later, we may change it. Now I realize this whole thing has disturbed your library and perhaps your digestion, but we hope it's in the interests of progress. If it isn't, then— You'd make our Lord move over to make room for progress? Brother Armbruster! Why don't you just hang the witch light around his neck? The abbot's face went frigid. I do not force your obedience, brother. See me in my study after Compline. The librarian wilted. I'll get the ladder, Father Abbot, he whispered, and shuffled unsteadily away. Don Paulo glanced up at the Christ of the Rood in the archway. Do you mind? He wondered. There was a knot in his stomach. He knew the knot would exact its price of him later. He left the basement before anyone could notice his discomfort. It was not good to let the community see how such trivial unpleasantness could overcome him these days. Got a short page break. It's good because I need water. Oh, hello, Croissant. I actually haven't checked my email the last couple days. I'll take a look. Thanks for the heads up. The installation was completed the following day, but Don Polo remained in his study during the test. Twice he had been forced to warn Brother Armbruster privately, and then to rebuke him publicly during chapter. And yet he felt more sympathy for the librarian's stand than he did for Cornhor's. He sat slumped at his desk and waited for the news from the basement, feeling small concern for the test's success or failure. He kept one hand tucked into the front of his habit. He patted his stomach as though trying to calm a hysterical child. Internal cramping again. It seemed to come whenever unpleasantness threatened, and sometimes went away again when unpleasantness exploded into the open, where he could wrestle with it. But now it was not going away. He was being warned, and he knew it. Whether the warning came from an angel, from a demon, or from his own conscience, it told him to beware of himself and of some reality not yet faced. What now? He wondered, permitting himself a silent belch and a silent beg pardon toward the statue of St. Leibowitz in the shrine-like niche in the corner of his study. A fly was crawling along St. Leibowitz's nose. The eyes of the saint seemed to be looking cross-eyed at the fly, urging the abbot to brush it away. The abbot had grown fond of the 26th century wood carving. Its face wore a curious smile of a sort that made it rather unusual as a sacramental image. The smile was turned down at one corner. The eyebrows were pulled low in a faintly dubious frown, although there were laugh wrinkles at the corners of the eyes. Because of the hangman's rope over one shoulder, the saint's expression often seemed puzzling. Possibly it resulted from slight irregularities in the grain of the wood, such irregularities dictating to the carver's hand as that hand sought to bring out finer details than were possible with such wood. Dom Paulo was not certain whether the image had been growth sculpted as a living tree before carving or not. Sometimes the patient master carvers of that period had begun with an oak or cedar sapling, and, by spending tedious years at pruning, barking, twisting, and tying living branches into desired positions, had tormented the growing wood into a striking dryad shape, arms folded or raised aloft, before cutting the mature tree for curing and carving. The resulting statue was unusually resistant to splitting or breaking, since most of the lines of the work followed the natural grain. Dom Paulo often marveled that the wooden Leibowitz had also proved resistant to several centuries of his predecessors, marveled because of the saint's most peculiar smile. "That little grin will ruin you some day," he warned the image. "Surely the saints must laugh in heaven. The psalmist says that God himself shall chortle. But Abbot Malmedy must have disapproved. God rest his soul. That solemn ass. How did you get by him, I wonder? You're not sanctimonious for some. That smile. Now, who do I know that grins that way? I like it, but someday another grim dog will sit in this chair, cave canem. He'll replace you with a plaster Leibowitz, long-suffering, one who doesn't look cross-eyed at flies, and then you'll be eaten by termites down in the storage room. To survive the church's slow sifting of the arts, you have to have a surface that can please a righteous simpleton, and yet you need a depth beneath that surface to please a discerning sage. The sifting is slow, but it gets a turn of the sifter handle now and then, when some new prelate inspects his episcopal chambers and mutters, "Oh, some of this garbage has got to go." The sifter was usually full of dulcet pap. When the old pap was ground out, fresh pap was added, but what was not ground out was gold, and it lasted. If a church endured 5 centuries of priestly bad taste, occasional good taste had, by then, usually stripped away most of the transient tripe, had made it a place of majesty that overawed the would-be prettifiers. The abbot fanned himself with a fan of buzzard feathers, but the breeze was not cooling. The air from the window was like an oven's breath off the scorched desert, adding to the discomfort caused him by whatever devil or ruthless angel was fiddling around with his belly. It was the kind of heat that hints of lurking danger from sun-crazed rattlers and brooding thunderstorms over the mountains, or rabid dogs and tempers made vicious by the scorch. It made the cramping worse. Please, he murmured aloud to the saint, meaning a non-verbal prayer for cooler weather, sharper wits, and more insight into his vague sense of something wrong. Maybe it's the cheese that does it, he thought. Gummy stuff this season, and green. I could dispense myself, and take a more digestible diet. But no, there we go again. Face it, Paulo, it's not the food for the belly that does it, it's the food for the brain. Something up there is not digesting. But what? The wooden saint gave him no ready answer. Pap, sifting out chaff. Sometimes his mind worked in snatches. It was better to let it work that way when the cramps came and the world weighed heavily upon him. What did the world weigh? It weighs, but it is not weighed. Sometimes its scales are crooked. It weighs life and labor and balance against silver and gold. That'll never balance. But, fast and ruthless, it keeps on weighing. It spills a lot of life that way, and sometimes a little gold. And blindfolded, a king comes riding across the desert with a set of crooked scales, a pair of loaded dice, and upon the flags emblazoned, Vexilla Regis. No! The abbot grunted, suppressing the vision. But of course, the saint's wooden smile seemed to insist. Don Paulo averted his eyes from the image with a slight shudder. Sometimes he felt that the saint was laughing at him. Do they laugh at us in heaven? He wondered. Saint Maisie of York herself. Remember her, old man? She died of a laughing fit. Well, that's different. She died laughing at herself. No, that's actually not so different either. Oh, the silent belch again. Tuesday's St. Maisie's feast, forsooth. Choir laughs reverently at the Alleluia of her Mass. Alleluia, ha ha, Alleluia, ho ho, Sancta Maisie intercede pro me. And the king was coming to weigh books in the basement with his pair of crooked scales. How crooked, Paulo, and what makes you think that the memorabilia is completely free of pap? Even the gifted and venerable Baudelaire once remarked scornfully that about half of it should be called the inscrutabilia. Treasured fragments of a dead civilization there were indeed, but how much of it has been reduced to gibberish, embellished with olive leaves and cherubims by 40 generations of us monastic ignoramuses, children of dark centuries, many entrusted by adults with an incomprehensible message to be memorized and delivered to other adults. I made him travel all the way from Texarkana through dangerous country, thought Paulo. Now I'm just worrying that what we've got may prove worthless to him, that's all. But no, that wasn't all. He glanced at the smiling saint again, and again, Vexilla Regis Inferni prodeunt. Forth come the banners of the King of Hell, whispered a memory of that perverted line from an ancient commedia. It nagged like an unwanted tune in his thought. The fist clenched tighter. He dropped the fan and breathed through his teeth. He avoided looking at the saint again. The ruthless angel ambushed him with a hot burst at his corporeal core. He leaned over the desk. That one had felt like a hot wire breaking. His hard breathing swept a clean spot in the film of desert dust on the desktop. The smell of the dust was choking. The room went pink, swarmed with black gnats. I don't dare belch. Might shake something loose, but holy saint and patron, I've got to. Pain is, ergo sum, Lord Christ God, accept this token. He belched, tasted salt, let his head fall onto the desk. Does the chalice have to be now, right this very minute, Lord, or can I wait a while? But crucifixion is always now. Now, ever since before Abraham, even, is always now. Before Fardentrot, even, now. Always for everybody, anyhow, is to get nailed on it and then to hang on it, and if you drop off, they beat you to death with a shovel, so do it with dignity, old man. If you can belch with dignity, you may get to heaven, if you're very sorry enough about messing up the rug. He felt very apologetic. He waited a long time. Some of the gnats died, and the room lost its blush, but went hazy and gray. Well, Paulo thought. Are we going to hemorrhage now, or are we just going to fool around about it? He probed the haze and found the face of the saint again. It was such a small grin, sad, understanding, and something else. Laughing at the hangman? No, laughing for the hangman, laughing at the Stultus Maximus, at Satan himself. It was the first time he had seen it clearly. In the last chalice there could be a chuckle of triumph. Hic commistio. He was suddenly very sleepy. The saint's face grayed over, but the abbot continued to grin weakly in repose. Prior Galt found him slumped over the desk shortly before noon. Blood showed between his teeth. The young priest quickly felt for a pulse. Dom Paulo awakened at once, straightened in his chair, and as if still in a dream, he pontificated imperiously. I tell you, it's all supremely ridiculous. It's absolutely idiotic. Nothing could be more absurd. What's absurd, Domni? The abbot shook his head, blinked several times. What? I'll get Brother Andrew at once. Oh, that's absurd. Come back here. What did you want? Nothing, Father Abbot. I'll be back as soon as I get Brother. Oh, bother the medic. You didn't come in here for nothing. My door was closed. Close it again. Sit down. Say what you want. The test was successful. Brother Cornhor's lamp, I mean. All right, let's hear about it. Sit down, start talking, tell me all about it. He straightened his habit and blotted his mouth with a bit of linen. He was still dizzy, but the fist in his belly had come unclenched. He could not have cared less about the prior's account of the test, but he tried his best to appear attentive. Got to keep him here until I'm awake enough to think. Can't let him go for the medic. Not yet. The news would get out. The old man is finished. Got to decide whether it's a safe time to be finished or not. That's the end of chapter 14, and regrettably I am going to stop early and not do chapter 15 today. I am sleepy, and I got to get up early tomorrow for the office. Chapter 15 is actually... Okay, you know what? Never mind. I'll just read it. It's really short, so you know what? Fuck it. Let me drink some water first. Okay. Chapter 15. Hongin Os was essentially a just and kindly man. When he saw a party of his warriors making sport of the Laridan captives, he paused to watch, but when they tied 3 Laridans by their ankles between horses and whipped the horses into frenzied flight, Hongin Os decided to intervene. He ordered that the warriors be flogged on the spot, for Hongin Os, Mad Bear, was known to be a merciful chieftain. He had never mistreated a horse. Killing captives is woman's work, he growled scornfully at the whipped culprits. Cleanse yourselves, lest you be squaw-marked, and withdraw from camp until the new moon, for you are banished 12 days. And, answering their moans of protest, suppose the horses had dragged one of them through camp. The grass-eater chieflings are our guests, and it is known that they are easily frightened by blood, especially the blood of their own kind. Take heed. But these are grass-eaters from the south, a warrior objected, gesturing toward the mutilated captives. Our guests are grass-eaters from the east. Is there not a pact between us real people and the east to make war upon the south? If you speak of it again, your tongue shall be cut out and fed to the dogs, Mad Bear warned. Forget that you heard such things. Will the herb men be among us for many days, O son of the mighty? Who can know what the farmer things plan? Mad Bear asked crossly. Their thought is not as our thought. They say that some of their numbers will depart from here to pass on across the dry lands, to a place of the grass-eater priests, a place of the dark-robed ones. The others will stay here to talk, but that is not for your ears. Now go, and be ashamed for 12 days. He turned his back, that they might slink away without feeling his gaze pour upon them. Discipline was becoming lax of late. The clans were restless. It had become known among the people of the plains that he, Hongen Os, had clasped arms across a treaty fire with a messenger from Texarkana, and that a shaman had clipped hair and fingernails from each of them to make a good faith doll as a defense against treachery by either party. It was known that an agreement had been made, and any agreement between people and grass-eaters was regarded by the tribes as a cause for shame. Mad Bear had felt the veiled scorn of the younger warriors, but there was no explaining to them until the right time came. Mad Bear himself was willing to listen to good thought, even if it came from a dog. The thought of grass-eaters was seldom good, but he had been impressed by the messages of the grass-eater king in the east, who had expounded the value of secrecy and deplored the idle boast. If the Laridans learned that the tribes were being armed by Hannigan, the plan would surely fail. Mad Bear had brooded on this thought. It repelled him, for certainly it was more satisfying and more manly to tell an enemy what one intended to do to him before doing it. And yet, the more he brooded on it, the more he saw its wisdom. Either the grass-eater king was a craven coward, or else he was almost as wise as a man. Mad Bear had not decided which, but he judged the thought itself as wise. Secrecy was essential, even if it seemed womanly for a time. If Mad Bear's own people knew that the arms which came to them were gifts from Hannigan, and not really the spoils of border raids, then there would arise the possibility of Laredo's learning of the scheme from captives caught on raids. It was therefore necessary to let the tribes grumble about the shame of talking peace with the farmers of the East. But the talk was not of peace. The talk was good, and it promised loot. A few weeks ago, Mad Bear himself had led a war party to the east, and had returned with 100 head of horses, 4 dozen long rifles, several kegs of black powder, ample shot, and 1 prisoner. But not even the warriors who had accompanied him knew that the cache of arms had been planted there for him by Hannigan's men, or that the prisoner was, in reality, a Texarkana cavalry officer who would in the future advise Mad Bear about probable Laridan tactics during the fight to come. All Grass-Eater thought was shameless, but the officer's thought could probe that of the Grass-Eaters to the south. It could not probe that of Hongen Os. Mad Bear was justifiably proud of himself as a bargainer. He had pledged nothing but to refrain from making war upon Texarkana and to stop stealing cattle from the eastern borders, but only as long as Hannigan furnished him with arms and supplies. The agreement to war against Laredo was an unspoken pledge of the fire, but it fitted Mad Bear's natural inclinations, and there was no need for a formal pact. Alliance with one of his enemies would permit him to deal with one foe at a time, and eventually he might regain the grazing lands that had been encroached upon and settled by the farmer people during the previous century. Night had fallen by the time the clan's chief rode into camp, and a chill had come over the plains. His guests from the east sat huddled in their blankets around the council fire, with 3 of the old people, while the usual ring of curious children gaped from surrounding shadows and peeped under tent skirts at the strangers. There were 12 strangers in all, but they separated themselves into 2 distinct parties which had traveled together, but apparently cared little for each other's company. The leader of one party was obviously a madman. While Mad Bear did not object to insanity, indeed it was prized by his shamans as the most intense of supernatural visitations, he had not known that the farmers likewise regarded madness as a virtue in a leader. But this one spent half of his time digging in the earth down by the dry riverbed, and the other half jotting mysteriously in a small book, obviously a witch, and probably not to be trusted. Mad Bear stopped only long enough to don his ceremonial wolf robes and have a shaman paint the totem mark on his forehead before he joined the group at the fire. "Be afraid!" an old warrior ceremonially wailed as the clan's chief stepped into the firelight. "Be afraid, for the mighty one walks among his children. Grovel, O clans, for his name is Mad Bear, a name well won, for as a youth he did overcome without weapons a bear run mad. With his naked hands did he strangle her, verily in the Northlands." Hongen Os ignored the eulogies and accepted a cup of blood from the old woman who served the council fire. It was fresh from a butchered steer and still warm. He drained it before turning to nod at the Easterners who watched the brief wassail with apparent disquiet. "Ah!" said the clan's chief. "Ah!" replied the three old people, together with one grass-eater who dared to chime in. The people stared at the grass-eater for a moment in disgust. The insane one tried to cover his companion's blunder. "Tell me," said the madman when the chieftain was seated, "how is it that your people drink no water? Do your gods object?" "Who knows what the gods drink?" rumbled Mad Bear. "It is said that water is for cattle and farmers, that milk is for children, and blood for men. Should it be otherwise?" The insane one was not insulted. He studied the chief for a moment with searching gray eyes, then nodded at one of his fellows. "That water for cattle explains it," he said. "The everlasting drought out here. A herdsman people would conserve what little water there is for the animals. I was wondering if they backed it by a religious taboo." His companion grimaced and spoke in the Texarkanan tongue. "Water? Ye gods, why can't we drink water, Thontadio? There's such a thing as too much conformity." He spat dryly. "Blood! Bah! It sticks in the throat. Why can't we have one little sip of... Not until we leave." "But Thon!" "No!" snapped the scholar. Then, noticing that the clanspeople were glowering at them again, he spoke to Mad Bear in the tongue of the plains. "My comrade here was speaking of the manliness and health of your people," he said. "Perhaps your diet is responsible." "Ha!" barked the chief, but then called almost cheerfully to the old woman, "Give that outlander a cup of red." Thontadio's companion shuddered, but made no protest. "I have, O chief, a request to make of your greatness," said the scholar. "Tomorrow we shall continue our journey to the west. If some of your warriors could accompany our party, we would be honored." "Why?" Thontadio paused. "Why, as guides." He stopped and suddenly smiled. "No, I'll be quite truthful. Some of your people disapprove of our presence here. While your hospitality has been..." Hongen Os threw back his head and roared with laughter. "They are afraid of the lesser clans," he said to the old ones. "They fear being ambushed as soon as they leave my tents. They eat grass and are afraid of a fight." The scholar flushed slightly. "Fear nothing, outlander," chortled the clan's chief. "Real men shall accompany you." Thontadio inclined his head in mock gratitude. "Tell us," said Mad Bear, "what is it you go to seek in the western dry land? New places for planting fields? I can tell you there are none. Except near a few water holes, nothing grows that even cattle will eat." "We seek no new land," the visitor answered. "We are not all of his farmers, you know. We are going to look for..." He paused. In the nomad speech, there was no way to explain the purpose of the journey to the Abbey of St. Leibowitz. "For the skills of ancient sorcery." One of the old ones, a shaman, seemed to prick up his ears. "An ancient sorcery in the west? I know of no magicians there, unless you mean the dark-robed ones." "They are the ones." "Ha! What magic do they have that's worth looking after? Their messengers can be captured so easily that it is no real sport. Although they do endure torture well, what sorcery could you learn from them?" "Well, for my part, I agree with you," said Thontadio. "But it is said that writings, incantations of great power are hoarded at one of their abodes. If it is true, then obviously the dark-robed ones don't know how to use them, but we hope to master them for ourselves." "Will the dark robes permit you to observe their secrets?" Thontadio smiled. "I think so. They don't dare hide them any longer. We could take them, if we had to. A brave saying, scoffed Mad Bear. Evidently the farmers are braver among their own kind, although they are meek enough among real people. The scholar, who had stomached his fill of the nomad's insults, chose to retire early. The soldiers remained at the council fire to discuss with Hongen Os the war that was certain to come, but the war, after all, was none of Thontadio's affair. The political aspirations of his ignorant cousin were far from his own interest in a revival of learning in a dark world, except when that monarch's patronage proved useful, as it already had, upon several occasions. Like I said, short chapter. That's the end of chapter 15. Next time we will probably read just 16. It's a bit lengthier. But yeah, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for stopping by. And good reminder, croissant, like you mentioned, for me to check my email. If anyone feels like sending me one, feel free. It's the same as my YouTube and Twitch username at gmail.com. And as always, thank you to Aindulmedir for the use of the Winter Scriptures. The Lunar Lexicon today. Check out his other albums, Starlore and the Winter Scriptures. You can find them on Spotify, Bandcamp, or YouTube. He's a cool dude. I'm a big fan. And yeah, that's it for today. I'll be back, I don't know, maybe the mood will take me Thursday or Friday, but if not, I'll be back on Monday. And yeah, as always, take it easy, stay safe out there. Shit's crazy. Take care of your neighbors. Look out for your friends. Be nice to people. Ignore foolishness. And let people who are filled with bitterness and hatred wear themselves out with their own energy. Why waste your time? All right, folks. Take it easy, and I'll catch you next time.